In one of the previous videos, we spent a little bit of time taking a look at the fact that PHP, like most programming languages, has the concept of variables as a part of it, and we looked a little bit at how variables are fundamentally used in PHP. In that video, we saw that every PHP variable has a name, and that those variables can then have values assigned to them, and those values can then be recalled and used as many times as is necessary throughout a script. In this video, what I wanted to do was go a little bit deeper into looking at PHP's use of variables. For starters, you might know that some programming languages require that whenever a variable is declared and used for the first time, that a data type for that variable be specified. The data type for that variable would basically tell the language what type of data that particular variable was meant to hold. A variable that was declared as a string type variable would hold a string. And in a very inflexible way, that is the only type of data that that variable would then be allowed to contain. Those types of languages are often referred to as strongly typed languages, and that is not what we have here with PHP. PHP is what is referred to as a weakly typed language. Essentially, as you saw in the previous video and as you'll see again in this one, whenever we declare a variable in PHP, we are not required to declare a particular data type for it. But just because we aren't declaring data types for our variables doesn't mean that data types don't exist. So let's take a look at this example that I have here. Up at the top of this script, what I have done is I've put together a handful of different variables, each one of them having essentially a different data type. The name variable here has a string that's being assigned to it, and because PHP is a weakly typed language, assigning a string to that variable will then essentially mean that that variable's data type is string. The age variable has an integer assigned to it, a whole number. The married variable has been assigned a Boolean value of true. The favorite number variable has been assigned a numeric value that has a decimal point in it, so that is a floating point or double number. And then the secrets variable has been given a special value of null. Of course, the reason secrets has null is because Victrola Firecracker has no secrets, but we'll take a look at that null data type here in a second. Down in the actual body of this page, what I've done is I've put together a table, an HTML table, and in that HTML table what I'm doing is I'm displaying the name of each one of those different variables and the actual value that's stored in it as PHP sees it. For each one of those, I've simply hard-coded in the actual name of the variable for the variable column, and for the value, what I'm doing is I'm using a set of PHP tags for each one and simply echoing the value of that variable. If we take a look at how that's rendered in the browser, there's a few interesting things to see. For starters, a lot of the stuff here is fairly straightforward as you'd expect. The name variable simply shows up as the name, the string. The integer value, 40, shows up as it is. Right? The favorite number, the floating point or double number, shows up as 9.7. But there's a few of these data types in here that are a little bit unusual. The married value, where I assigned it a value of true, you can see is actually showing up here as a value of 1. PHP takes the Boolean true value and always displays it when it's asked to display it as the number 1. If I were to go back over to the source code and I were to change the value of married to false, refresh my browser, you can see in that case nothing shows up. Whenever PHP is asked to display a value of false, it displays nothing. Now, true and false do actually exist in PHP. What we're talking about here is how PHP actually shows those values when they're asked to display them. So the reason that true shows up as 1 and false shows up as blank is specifically because I am echoing those values. If I wasn't trying to echo that married value, that true or false value, then in the actual code itself, you can still think of married as having a true Boolean value, true or false. The other value in here that's maybe a little bit unusual is the secrets variable. The secrets variable, when it's displayed, shows up as nothing. There's just simply nothing there. And again, in the code itself, the actual real value, as the code would see it, is that secrets has a value of null. Null being a special value which basically represents no value. It's a value you can put in that says no value is here. Kind of strange in a way. But again, when PHP is asked to echo a null value, we don't get an error saying the variable doesn't exist because the variable does exist. What PHP does instead is it simply translates that null value, that value representing nothingness, into an empty string, into nothingness, when it's actually asked to display it. So now that we have this group of variables, we can display each one of them, and we've talked a little bit about the different types of data each one of them actually contain. Is it ever going to be important in PHP for us to know the actual data type that a variable possesses at any particular time? The answer is yes. There are certainly situations, are certainly times when it will be important for us to be aware of the actual data type of a variable as it stands at any particular moment. As a result of that, PHP gives us some ways that we can get information about the actual data type of a variable. I'm going to come down here to the table in the body, and I'm going to make a little change to it. I'm going to add in another column to my table where I actually show the data type. I'll run through this here real quick because watching me type is probably not the most fun in the world. There we go. If you take a look at the code here, what I've actually done in the body of my table is I've added in another column, another set of TD cells, and inside those I have put in a new set of PHP tags, and I have echoed get type open close parentheses, where I then have the name of a particular variable inside the parentheses. Here I have the name variable, on the next line age, next line after that married, and so on and so forth. What I'm actually doing here is I'm calling a built-in function in PHP called getType. Yes, PHP has functions. We haven't discussed them previously, but they're definitely something that we'll see quite a bit of as we go forward. Here I'm actually calling this function, which is a part of PHP. It's simply available to us anytime, any place. And what the getType function does for us is it allows us to pass it a value, and it will then tell us what data type it assumes or that it sees that particular value as being. Now notice that I said that I'm passing it a value and not a variable. Like I said before, variables in PHP don't really have a data type because PHP is weakly typed. It's a weakly typed language. What I'm doing here when I pass getType $name is just like every other time I said $name, I'm referring to the value of that variable. So I'm asking PHP to tell me the type of the value of the name variable in this particular case. If I go over and actually take a look at the result of these getType function calls in my browser, this is what I end up getting, more or less what we discussed before. The name variable PHP can see is a string variable, age is an integer, married is Boolean, favorite number is a double. Sometimes there's a little bit of confusion with doubles in PHP because they can be referred to as floats or as doubles. The two terms in PHP tend to act fairly interchangeably, but whenever you do call the getType function in PHP and you pass it a number with a decimal point in it, it will always report it as double. And down here, when I asked for the value or the data type of the secrets variable, it gave me back null. Notice here the null is all caps, whereas when I actually assigned the value, I put it in as all lowercase. PHP recognizes null as all lowercase or all caps, but getType, the function, always returns it as all caps. Either one works for the most part. So even though we never specifically assigned a value to our variables, you can see that based on the value that a variable contains, PHP is able to infer a data type for that particular variable. In most cases, it's not terribly important what these data types are, but like I said before, there are some situations where it may be important. There might be certain operations we want to perform, like if we're trying to do any type of arithmetic. It might be important that we confirm that variables are actually of a numeric type before we try to do any arithmetic on them. But for the most part, we're able to just kind of go on and let PHP handle the data types of our variables, and we generally don't have to worry about it too terribly much. That's the benefit of a weakly typed language. One thing that we may occasionally need to do, however, is we may occasionally, again, based on operation, based on exactly what it is that we're trying to accomplish, we may occasionally need to be able to change the actual data type of a variable. We can do that in PHP through a process called casting. Casting is basically a process where we ask PHP to change the value of a particular variable to be something else. So as an example of that, let me drop in a little paragraph here down below my table. And in that paragraph, I'm going to put in some PHP tags. And in those PHP tags, let me take one of my variables and cast it, essentially change it to a different value. Let me take my age variable, which is currently an integer, and let me turn it into a floating point number, a double. I'm going to do that. I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call it decimal. That's just an arbitrary variable name that I've selected, nothing magical about it. And then inside parentheses, I'm going to put in double, and then following that, I'm going to put in the actual name of the variable that I want to cast. It's this data type in parentheses followed by a variable or a value that is the actual cast itself. Essentially what I'm doing here is I'm asking PHP to take the variable age and to treat it for the purposes of this statement as if it were of type double. When it takes the age and treats it like a double, it will then take the resulting value and will assign it to my variable called decimal. If I were to now echo the decimal variable and take a look at that in my browser, it comes back 40. Well, hey, what's the deal? I don't really see any difference. 40 here from decimal looks very much the same as 40 up here for age. Did the cast actually work? Well, let's try something else. Let me do echo. I'm going to echo a break, and then I'm going to echo getType for my decimal variable. And it comes back and tells me, yes, indeed, decimal is a double. So up here, age was considered to be an integer, but after my cast, when I changed that age value into a double and put it into the decimal variable, you can see that indeed PHP is now considering it to be a double. That could potentially have ramifications on what would happen if I were to take that number and divide it by another number. Is it going to keep track of the decimal point or not? Let's try another one here. I'm going to make another paragraph. In this paragraph, another set of PHP tags. And in this set of PHP tags, let me make another new variable, going through basically the same process we went through before. Let me call this one a simple number. And I'm going to say turn into an integer the value that's currently in the favorite number variable. The favorite number variable is a double value. I'm asking PHP to turn it here, cast it as an integer, and to then take the result and assign it to the variable called simple number. Like I did up above, if I say echo simple number, I'll echo a break just to make the output a little easier to see, and then I'll echo getType for simple number. Let's jump back over to the browser and see what we get. There we are. So we started off with favorite number, which had a value of 9.7 and was considered to be a double. I then asked PHP to cast that value as an integer. When it did that, it actually had to, in this case, change the value itself. Since integer values cannot have decimal places, PHP truncated the number. It essentially took the decimal point and everything to the right of it and chopped it off and threw it away. So what had previously been 9.7 became just 9. This did not happen when we converted our age variable into a double, because in that case, the conversion didn't actually require any data to be removed. A double value was more than sufficient to be able to store the integer value that we already had, so no change was necessary, unlike with favorite number, where an integer was insufficient to be able to hold the precision of the number that we had previously stored as a double. Last little thing down there then, you can see that PHP is at this point actually considering the simple number variable to be an integer, so both of our casts worked just fine. If I jump back over to my browser again, there are some other functions besides getType that PHP makes available to us that we can use to get information regarding data types. Let's play with them here just a little bit with our decimal and simple number variables. All right. One of the functions that we have available here is a function called isInteger. The isInteger function, oops, boy, I messed that up. The isInteger function will let us know whether PHP considers a particular value to be an integer or not. In this case, I've turned the decimal value into a double through a cast right here. So when I ask PHP, is this number an integer, the value that should come back would be false. I do not consider that to be an integer. If I echo that value, go over and take a look in the browser, I don't see anything. Did my statement not work? Actually, it should have worked just fine. What's actually happening here is the answer to this question, is decimal an integer? The answer to that is false. And like we saw up above with the married value, false is always displayed as a blank. So sometimes that can actually throw you off just a little bit. Here, if instead of looking at decimal, if I said the age variable, is that an integer? Then the answer comes back as 1, which, like we discussed before, is how PHP represents true. Besides this isInteger function, PHP has similar functions to that for just about every other data type that it recognizes. There's is_float, is_boolean, is_string. Right? I'm not going to go through and demonstrate every single one of them. They're not the most exciting functions in the world, but they certainly can occasionally come in handy. If you want to know more about these functions, I would certainly recommend you go take a look at the PHP documentation. If you go into your web browser and go to the website php.net, right, there's a search box here in the upper right-hand corner where you can type in the name of a function or even a part of the name of a function, and it will look up for you and give you a reference, give you documentation on it. So here I've just typed the word is, and when I hit the enter key, the website finds for me every function that has the word is in it. So some of those I mentioned before, is string, is boolean, is null, is double. The is integer that we used is right here. And you can see that there are quite a few others that you can experiment with or put into use if you happen to need them. Another set of functions that are very handy in PHP when it comes to dealing with variables are functions that I think of as revealing the status of a variable. What I find in PHP very often is that I'm less interested specifically in the data type of a variable than I am to its status. And by status, I essentially mean, does the variable exist or doesn't it? And is the variable empty or is it not? Let's take a look at some of those functions. Back over in my code again, I'm again going to put in another paragraph. And in this paragraph, I'm going to echo the string, does age exist? Oh, do you see what I've done wrong? I forgot my PHP tags. Let me put those back in. There. Does age exist? If I render that in my browser, it does show up. It just says, does age exist? If I actually wanted to then to be able to programmatically determine if the age variable existed or not, I could make use of a function called isSet. The isSet function allows you to pass a variable to it, age for example, and it will then come back and let you know, does that variable actually exist or not. If I echo the value returned by isSet, then it comes back and tells me, does age exist 1, which of course again is PHP's representation for true. If I were to try the same thing again, but I were to give it a variable that doesn't exist, let's say I try and give it a variable called address. Right? Victrola Firecracker did not provide his address, so if I say, does address exist, the answer that comes back is a nothing, which of course means false. So the isSet function tells us, does a variable exist or not? And one of the interesting things about it is that when you do call a variable with that function, even if that variable doesn't exist, we don't get an error in that case, any kind of warning or notice from PHP. It understands what it is that we're trying to do. We're trying to determine if that thing exists or not, so an error or a warning would not be the most helpful thing for PHP to do at that point. Very similar to this, there's another function that's handy that lets us know if a variable is empty or not. Let's say isName empty. This particular function is just called empty, and if you pass it a variable, it will again come back and tell you true or false. Is that variable empty or is it not? So here in this case, when I ask is name empty, I get back a false. The name variable is not currently empty. If I were to say, is the address empty? In that case, it comes back and it gives me a 1. So in a lot of cases, empty and isSet are very similar, can be used in sort of overlapping situations, but both of them I tend to find very handy. I could easily say that I use the isSet and empty functions 1,000 times for every one time that I use getType or one of the isType different functions. Right. isSet and empty, very, very valuable parts of my toolbox. I use those two a lot. One other situation, though, we might want to look at real quickly concerning is set and empty deals with null values. Remember, I had this variable called secrets that has a value of null. Now, the secrets variable in a technical sort of sense does have a value. The value of it is null. Right? We can see that here when we ask for the data type of that particular variable. It's like there's something there, right? Something to have a data type. But the null data type is meant specifically to represent nothing. So what would happen if I asked if a null variable is set? If I say is secrets set, and then I run is set on the secrets variable, right? It comes back and tells me false, secrets is not set. So that's a little bit strange compared to what we were seeing before. There actually is a secrets variable in my code, but given the fact that the value of the secrets variable is null, PHP reports it as not having been set because null represents nothing. Very similar to that, if I ask if secrets is empty, it comes back and tells me true. Secrets is empty. But in a technical sense, it's sort of not. It's not really empty. It has something in it. It has the value of null, but null represents nothing. It all gets kind of strange in a chasing your tail sort of way, but still very handy functions, maybe slightly different behavior with null value than you would have expected otherwise.